When I was a kid growing up, the games I spent the most time with were ultra competitive. Things like Halo, Counter-Strike, and when I felt like ruining my day, League of Legends and Dota. And the reason I loved these games was because of how deterministic they were. The skill and success felt like it entirely relied on my actions, and random chance didn't play much of a role. But as I've grown older, I've come to find that not only were these games a lot more arbitrary than I originally thought, but also that I've now come to love the tumultuous nature of randomness in the games I play and in the life I live, learning to embrace that which we can't control instead of denying it at every turn. You see, RNG, or random number generators, are a key part of almost every single game we play and love. From RPGs, open worlds, and narrative dives, to yes, even highly competitive bouts like StarCraft or Counter-Strike. For many of us, randomness is a love-hate relationship, where oftentimes chance can give us some of the highest highs, but other times, the lowest of lows. But regardless, RNG is in my opinion pivotal to what makes games great, because RNG is also at the core of what makes life memorable too. So today, let's talk about the secret engines and forces behind the very nature of the worlds we yearn to call home, and see what it is that makes RNG the cornerstone of so many great experiences and a hidden mechanic and architect at the nucleus of what makes games fun to play. Recently, I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3, and it's a game that's impressive for a myriad of reasons, but maybe at the forefront of those is its propensity to rely on chance, a staple of Dungeons and Dragons. For every action you take in game, whether it be the swing of your sword or simply trying to talk to someone behind a door, the outcome of everything relies on the luck of a dice. You can have maxed out points in charisma and still roll a 1 or critical failure, meaning all of your pre-planning and character creation and all of the level up screens was for nothing. And this kind of game design leads to many awesome moments where something unexpected and fun happens, but also countless times where you are left more frustrated than fulfilled. And that's the biggest struggle with RNG in video games. It's a balancing act where a lack of RNG runs the risk of being mundane and uneventful, but too much and the story and gameplay can become overly complex and unwieldy. So I have a question then. How do you solve issues like that? What would you do? Maybe you could take cues from games like Fallout and Underrail, where skill checks are used instead of dice rolls. That way, as long as you meet the requirements, you pass the check, and if you don't, you fail. It makes it feel like you have more control over your journey, and all those enhancements to your character actually matter because luck doesn't play much of a role. The problem with this, though, is it's just such a boring way for stories to be told, especially in games. Because when I think back to some of the greatest moments and memories in all the games I've played, almost all of them come from chance encounters, random happenstance, or completely unexpected things happening in the moment. Imagine if in Breaking Bad or in The Avengers, everything always went by the books. No one ever betrayed anyone, all the future events were telegraphed perfectly, and there wasn't a twist in sight. Imagine if Thanos was never actually able to snap his fingers and wipe away half the universe in The Avengers. Without unexpected and wild things happening in a story or narrative, the entire thing becomes calculated and callous, and worst of all, boring. And that's the exact purpose that RNG serves in games. It's a necessary evil that guides what we all love about fantasy, something a lot of you might be on the trail of now. Can you guess what it is? Because in games specifically, a twist in a story or moment where your previous actions come back to haunt you is always awesome. But moments like that pale in comparison next to truly dynamic and systematic encounters. Things we commonly see in immersive sims and RPGs, where simply by choosing to, for example, pickpocket a character in game, might result in new dialogue chains down the line and an entirely new quest on the fly. Randomness in games allows for more moments like this, where instead of pre-planned story beats and decisions that fork a narrative, your own actions within a game's systems leads to new events and memories. And randomness, well, it might just be the best mechanic at encouraging things like this, because it's only by throwing unexpected things at the player and seeing how they react that a game really takes advantage of the medium it's within, one where agency plays a key role, the specific thing that makes games so powerful. It's the same reason I don't like saving in video games either, because it takes away from the otherwise amazing consequences and random events that can become staggering memories later. If you can just reload a save, then what's the point of choice in the first place? One of my many unpopular opinions about this industry, but I already made a video on that. Games also use RNG because it's an integral part of keeping games fresh. Even highly competitive games have their own forms of RNG. In StarCraft, for instance, there's a fog of war that only goes away as you explore, meaning you have no idea what your opponent is up to at any given moment unless you sacrifice resources to do scouting and infiltrate the enemy's base. In Counter-Strike, a game based around pure skill, many people don't know this, but every gun has a certain range where outside of it, you do not actually have perfect first bullet accuracy, even standing still. Rather, instead the bullet can fall anywhere within a small coned radius. Mechanics like this are crucial to even the most competitive games because without the smallest sense of RNG, things become stale fast. It's why some of the most interesting maps to actually watch in esports are the ones that are asymmetrical, where each team has different advantages and disadvantages to account for. Like the fact that you can only use certain guns in Counter-Strike as an attacker or defender, and how in Dota there's a Dire and Radiant side, each with their own jungle and lane layouts that differ sometimes greatly. Things like this make it so any round never plays out quite the same, and makes playing and watching much more enjoyable, especially over time. And that's because without randomness or surprise in our lives, we as humans grow bored very quickly. Or what about games like the Civilization series, where every conquest starts with a new randomly generated map? What about games like Borderlands or Diablo, that adrenaline rush of opening a chest and not knowing what piece of randomly generated loot is going to pop out? Why is it more fun getting that special piece of gear when you only have a chance of seeing it? We are pattern matching creatures at heart because without constant stimuli, we grow bored when we think we have something all figured out. So RNG plays the crucial role of keeping our monkey brains entertained in a way where we can't feel like we have something solved and moved on. And it's the same reason narratives that lack subtle dialogue and exposition become boring so fast. Stories and scripts that captivate us oftentimes have subtle questions and clues that you must slowly piece together for yourself that make the experience interesting because not all the puzzle pieces are in place for you just yet. And contrary to popular belief, we do want to have to work to figure out stories or gameplay loops in the games we play. We just don't want to have to feel like we are actually doing anything while it's happening. However, that same psychology in all of us that makes RNG so good and addictive is also what can make it so bad too. Because we have a propensity as human beings to focus more on the negative than the positive. If you succeed at a check that only had a 5% chance to succeed in game, it feels great, but you quickly forget about it. But if you fail at a 95% chance check, you will be pissed and complain about how bad and unfair the game is for hours. Failure sticks around in our thoughts and affects us a lot more than success, as countless psychological studies have shown. And because of this, many games implement systems that rig RNG in order to make it feel better. For example, in Baldur's Gate 3 by default, there is a setting that is turned on called Karmic Dice. Instead of each dice roll having a completely random output, with each failure you accrue, your chances of success on the next go up. That way you can never wind up in situations where you are failing over and over and the game feels unfair due to how much it relies on chance. And countless other games do this too, like Splunky, where you cannot get very certain and difficult rooms to appear if you clear a level fast enough. That way runs going very well cannot meet an unfortunate end due to pure happenstance. And it's because of the potential downsides that developers constantly have to come up with systems and ideas in gameplay that counteract the potential frustration of dealing with bad rolls or unexpected outcomes due to RNG. Things like being able to reload saves, getting rid of dice rolls in favor of skill checks, bringing the system behind the scenes that way it feels fair to our simple brains due to negativity bias, or just designing games entirely around being as deterministic as possible. These are all crutches that take away from the amazing aspects that RNG can provide, because I truly think that randomness and embracing it really is the future of games and what can make them so much better. The real issue is we just aren't having enough discussions about the current issues and how to solve them, because there are some surefire ways to to make RNG in games amazing, and I'm willing to bet all of you have a sense as to what that is. You might even be thinking of it right now. But first, we need to talk about the aspects of randomness itself. Because you see, there are actually two types of RNG in games, and one of them specifically is the type most people hate and the type that causes almost all of the issues commonly debated. The first type, and much less controversial, is something called input randomness. This is things like getting a new ability or set of abilities at the start of a run in a roguelike, or having a randomly generated map spawn when you first plop down into your latest world in Minecraft. It's a system where there is an element of RNG, but it comes at the start of an encounter, hence the input randomness moniker. And instead of it affecting how things play out during an event, it instead allows the user to take the randomness into account. That way they can plan for the future. People tend to actually like RNG like this in games because it feels fair. For example, in roguelites, every time you die, you start again at the beginning of the game, but now usually with a new set of weapons, powers, or abilities. Take Returnal, for instance. And while this means your power level can vary greatly between runs because of pure chance, it feels good because you know what you are getting into right from the start. Even if you spawn with a bad initial starting zone in Minecraft, it still feels like you have all the power and control in your hands to make the best of a bad situation. And that's a big part of the fun in a lot of these games. Feeling that sense of accomplishment when you make a plan based around a random start is never not satisfying. The more controversial type of randomness though, the one I'm sure all of you are on the edge of your seat to hear more about, that is usually the cause for more complaints and annoyance in RNG, is actually output RNG. Output RNG is exactly what it sounds like. It's the opposite of input RNG, where instead of randomness affecting the state of a world for which you must figure it out, instead the outcome from chance plays a pivotal role in situations during the adventure too. A great example of this is percentage hit chances from games like Baldur's Gate and the XCOM series. It can feel really bad if you have a 99% chance to hit something and you miss. And if it happens twice in a row, you can guarantee you will be flipping out in a fit of rage. And for anyone that loves playing games like these like I do, you know how annoying this can be, and also how common. Or what about in Baldur's Gate 3, when a super lovable character you're trying to romance randomly gets killed in a one-off side quest because you had a really bad roll of the dice, and now unexpectedly your favorite part of the game is gone. Moments like this are exactly why people have such an issue with output RNG specifically. It feels like it takes away all the skill and thought, because no matter how much planning you did, you could still get screwed. And even more than that, it just results in things people hate sometimes. But let me stop you right there.
Criminal scum.
What if I told you that output RNG actually took more skill and more planning than input RNG? And not only that, but output RNG was actually the catalyst for even more memorable and amazing moments in the games we love, and is also a key ingredient to solving the puzzle from before of how to make RNG in games amazing. Let's take a look back at the hypothetical I brought up earlier, where you have a 99% chance to hit an enemy with your huge and high damage spell, but somehow, despite all logic, it misses. All instincts would tell us this completely takes the skill out of the game, and that now planning is irrelevant because anything could technically happen. But I would argue it's actually the exact opposite. It's only in those moments when something unexpected happens that we get to see the true test of one's skill. A great example of this is it's often said that the mark of a good chess player is how they can handle seemingly unwinnable positions or unexpected plays on the board that they never could have accounted for. Or in other words, the ability to on the fly come up with solutions. In a way, output RNG is input RNG, but just with a couple of extra steps and higher difficulty. If you miss an easy attack during your turn of a battle, you can think about that as the start to a new puzzle you must solve. And oftentimes, it's players who can do this that are considered the most skilled at any game. In StarCraft, you can't even see what your opponent is doing at the start of the game. You might not even know what race they're playing. And that means until you do scouting or something happens, you are completely in the blind as to what your enemy is up to. Which means sometimes your opponent might do an all-in rush attack on your base that isn't even ready to be defended. And it's only the most skilled players in the world that can thwart these onslaughts simply by making the appropriate changes as the information is fed to them on the fly. That's what a true test of skill is, claiming victory even when things aren't going your way. And even more importantly, moments like this are what keep games exciting. It's not fun to watch or do the same thing over and over, or even engage with something where the outcome is already clear. Output RNG is the perfect antidote to this ailment. It forces you as the player to actually stay on your toes, to always keep your brain engaged and alert, and most important of all, it forces us to work for our satisfaction. It goes back to the same issue with narrative as before, where people think they want to be spoon-fed the answers, but really what we want is the satisfaction of feeling like we figured it all out by ourselves. That same methodology goes for all types of RNG. It gives us the chance to actually come up with solutions that are our own, not something that was pre-planned from the start. But I get why RNG can be such an issue. It can feel like it's taking away power from players wanting a power fantasy in the first place. It takes away your ability to tell that specific story you wanted to have and to make sure all of your outcomes are what you expect. And most people's problem with RNG is frankly that. It can be super annoying and take away from your own adventure. For a lot of players, for example, in single-player games, they want to just tell their own story. They want to experience the narrative exactly how they want, and they don't want random YouTube essayists like yours truly gatekeeping their ability to enjoy something they paid for. But you see, that's just the issue. RNG in games shouldn't be taking away the fun. If anything, it should be enhancing it. But you know what? I'm going to say something that might surprise a lot of you, and that's that almost no games are doing RNG right. And it's absolutely crazy because with just a couple small tweaks, RNG would probably be a lot of players' favorite part of most games. Let me give you a perfect example. I think the main reason so many people say like to reload saves in Baldur's Gate 3, myself included by the way, is because not only is the option so easy and frictionless that the alternative of suffering short term doesn't even make sense, but also the rewards for accepting your fate just aren't worth it. So many times in games nowadays, the easiest solution to something happening that you didn't intend for is just quickly reloading the nearest save. And that means that the aspect of RNG itself starts to lose so much of its meaning. The whole reason there's even dice rolls in Baldur's Gate 3 is because it's supposed to make every encounter better. It's supposed to make it so anything can happen at any time, which makes you stay on your toes and always keep mixing things up. It's a remnant of traditional tabletop where every action is up to the chance of a die. But historically in games, this sort of RNG is frowned upon without a get out of jail free card. But because of that, we lost sight of what made tabletop so great in the first place. The idea that RNG, that true randomness, was actually what was fun about the game itself. In games, we often don't think about it this way because we don't go into them with the same sort of expectations about random things happening. We expect to be able to build our characters exactly how we want, to tackle and beat combat and narrative encounters exactly as we planned based on our builds and attributes we assigned. And because of this, any sort of deviation from the path is seen as lesser or bad. Think about the last character you made in an RPG. Was he or she a smooth-talking criminal, a knight in shining armor, an ugly monstrosity? Well, that's probably all they were, because without constant fear of failure or not being able to achieve what your character is good at, they never actually grow. They never face any challenges outside what they were spec'd for, and worst of all, they never get the character development you see in Dungeons and Dragons due to erratic and unknown dice rolls. And don't get me wrong, I get it in a sense. After all, how is my super charismatic hero that has talked his way out of 50 boss fights suddenly stumbling on his words, talking to some random beggars on the street because of an unlucky roll? But that sense of randomness, that RNG that comes to fruition in the game sometimes is what makes the experience even more exciting. So many times players miss out on what could have otherwise been amazing stories and moments because they simply refuse to accept the RNG the game gives them, or they keep reloading to see other stories, thus taking away the effect the main story could have had on them. And it's not your fault. We've been trained to play games this way, to reload saves, to experience game-breaking bugs that force us back, or just wind up in situations where the outcomes were not what we expected and we want to go back. But then how come all of this stuff works in tabletop? Why is it that people have so much fun playing traditional tabletop games despite nothing ever seeming to go their way or any stories unfolding how they wanted? Well, the main issue is that in tabletop you have a dungeon master who on the fly can come up with awesome solutions to failure. Because one of the biggest issues with RNG in games is sometimes it can mean you wind up in weird situations where you simply miss an attack or say the wrong thing in dialogue, and when these things happen, usually there is no upside. It simply just means you miss an attack or do something wrong and feel bad about it. With a dungeon master sitting right in front of you, this can be resolved with fun and interesting situations that will spawn based on what just happened. But in games, this is much harder to accomplish since everything must be pre-programmed beforehand. That is, until AI gets good enough it can handle it for us. The holy grail of game design, but that's another topic for another day. The thing is though, we already have games that do this so well. Baldur's Gate 3, the example I've been using throughout this video, has so many amazing things, for example, that happen if you simply trust in the roll of the dice. But many players will never see these things because they will simply reload saves over and over until the RNG hits just right for them, or they'll reload the saves over and over to see every story beat, but that again takes away from the power that RNG would have on that first encounter and actually having real consequence. Another perfect example of a game that does this amazingly is Disco Elysium. In Disco Elysium, almost all of the best, funniest, and most intriguing situations in the game result not from success, but rather failure. The game conditions you from the very start to roll with the punches and accept defeat, because when you do, you are given immediate feedback that is engaging, along with the promise of ramifications further down the line that might just be better than what you originally had intended. For example, there's a boy in the game you meet very early on named Kuno, and if you succeed a long set of dialogue checks against him, you can get some fairly useful information on a murder you're trying to solve for the local town. But if you fail, then Kuno will start to shout at you, calling you pig, making fun of you, and screaming the most obscene and heinous things you have ever heard from a bratty little kid. The second option is infinitely more funny, interesting, and memorable, and also can lead to later dialogue opening up down the line about Kuno and his past, along with more heartfelt moments and honestly a story that is just told better. Disco Elysium perfectly encapsulates what it means to have good RNG in video games, because instead of RNG being seen as simply success or failure, of which any of the forks are as good as the others. The reason output RNG in games is usually so bad is because it's so boring or annoying. If you miss a 90% chance to hit your target, there is no upside. You just feel like you were cheated, and while it may increase the difficulty level, it doesn't do much else besides that. But what if this was handled properly? What if when you missed an attack in game, the enemies instead started making fun of you? Maybe they would taunt you and suddenly realize they distracted themselves while laughing, and you could sneak in someone behind for a big damage attack. Maybe sometimes when you miss an attack with your dagger, your character could fail so spectacularly that they swing the weapon all the way around back into themselves and fall off balance. By just sprinkling in little rewards for failure like this, suddenly the idea of RNG itself becomes much more interesting and a lot less annoying. Here's another interesting thought for you guys. When you're talking about games with your friends and about your favorite moments in those games, what are you usually referring to specifically? Maybe you touch on story moments or things you all experienced that were cool, but usually when we are all around the water cooler talking about the game we're all playing, the conversations center around the things that aren't the same for all of us. Ways in which a mission played out and how different it was for someone else, how we tackled certain situations in genius ways and the outcomes that came because of it. These moments are cool because they are different, and it's the same principle that makes RNG so fun too. If a game can convince you to simply trust it and take you on a journey regardless of RNG outcomes, those are the journeys that we talk about and remember the most. Dice rolls in Baldur's Gate 3 are so much more impactful than skill checks in say Fallout and Underrail because those moments aren't so deterministic. There's more to them, and because of that, it makes it so at every step during the adventure, you never know what's going to happen, and it makes everything that much more impactful. What I'm really getting at is that if you want to have all the upsides of RNG in games while limiting the downsides, the two things you really need to do are limiting the player's ability to counteract it, that being saves, skill checks, and other mechanics like karmic dice, but also making the RNG actually fun no matter what happens, even in failure. designing systems where no matter what you do and no matter what outcomes you have, the story and game progresses on in a way that can't help but captivate you. To me, RNG in games is the hidden mechanic behind almost all of the most fun and engaging things that I have loved in the adventures I've been on, at least most of the memorable ones. And it's for that reason that I really hope not only do more developers start working on even more RNG focused systems, but that more players start embracing them too. Because RNG at its core is what keeps our lives exciting, and in games, it's no different. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and let me know down below what your thoughts on random number generators in games are, and even just the ideas behind randomness and complexity in games and what makes them great. I hope you all have a fantastic day and week, and until next time.